Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Salesforce Ben LinkedIn Live, where today we're going to be having an Ask Me Anything session with a couple of certified Salesforce technical architects. Now, if you don't know what a CTA is, it is the hardest and the most technical Salesforce certification you can get, and it's very challenging. It's a lot more than just doing a multiple choice questionnaire like the other certifications. So let's dive in. So this is an Ask Me Anything session. So please, if you have any questions for Nadina and Matt, who I'll introduce in a minute, please put them in the comments throughout the session, and we'll get as many of them as we can answered. So this is a webinar, so all lines are muted, and this will be recorded as well. Feel free to head over to our YouTube channel where you can subscribe and you can see all of our previous LinkedIn Lives, and this one will live there afterwards as well. So without further ado, well, I'll introduce myself first, actually. My name is Ben McCarthy. I'm founder of Salesforce Ben, and I'm going to be your host for today. And I will introduce Matt, who is our first CTA. Hey, Matt, how's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me on, Ben.
Appreciate it. No worries. Thank you for being here. If you could introduce yourself, that'd be great. Thank you.
Sure. My name is Matt Myers. I am a co-founder of EC Protect, and I've been doing a CTA for about 18 plus years. And what I focus on myself is helping educate people about self-security in Salesforce, and also helping train the next generation of architects.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Thanks for being here. And Nadina, thank you for being here as well. If you could introduce yourself, please.
Thank you so much for having me. Yes, so my name's Nadina Lisbon. I'm an enterprise architect at NetApp. I've been doing Salesforce for about 10 years. And currently right now, I'm a new Golden Hoodie recipient. I'm also a Salesforce MVP, a MuleSoft ambassador, Ladies Be Architect ambassador, and many, many other things. And I love solving enterprise problems.
Great. Thank you so much, guys. So to get us kicked off, and I'll throw this out there for whoever wants to take the question. Could you please describe what a CTA is?
Sure. I guess I'll take the first one. I'll take that first one. So I think there's a lot of different, I would say, people that or ideas about what a CTA is. But I would say the biggest thing is it's not really about just the credential, where a lot of people are chasing the credential. Really, it's just a higher level of thinking, of how to thinking like an architect, considering a lot of different aspects, being not only just the technical, but the business, and understanding what are the trade-offs and the impacts of a customer. I think when we talked a long time ago before, one of the biggest things I say, just people will come to you with a design. It doesn't mean that you should do it. You need to understand how to translate that, what the business is asking, and what are the impacts that would happen if you do certain actions on the platform.
Nice. So I'd imagine this really applies to very large enterprise multi-org kind of projects.
I would say generally yes, but you also could be in a smaller organization. I think I'm a really big fan and advocate of Salesforce well architected. And I think that always thinking about how you're architecting the platform, and what you're building, and what are those impacts now and 5 years from now, and also thinking about how long does that need to last? Is it for 1 week? Is it for 5 years? And it doesn't matter really if it's small or large. I think it's really the same thought process you go through. But of course, there's a lot more things to consider when it's a large enterprise.
Yeah, I definitely agree, especially working for a customer. I think a CTA is a very strategic role, a very high-level executive role, and really focused on business transformation and helping that organization, not just for the today, but also forward-looking and future thinking.
Great.
Exactly. Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's a big thing that you touched on there, Nadina, is a lot of people think of the CTA as just a technical role only, but it's not true. There's a lot of business aspects to that. So you need to be both have a deep understanding of business and the business impacts, as well as the technical side of it as well, in addition.
100% agree.
Great, thank you. And let's take our first question from the audience, an audience member. So thank you very much for that. how would you describe the differences between a Salesforce solution architect and a Salesforce technical architect?
I can take that one. So I think with a solution architect, you're really focused on the how and why of the solution, whereas with a Salesforce technical architect, it's more overarching the entire aspect of what is being implemented. So from a solution perspective, you're really focusing on how you're going to do it, why you're going to do it, and really helping the business solve those specific problems. Whereas with Salesforce technical architect, you have those technical components, but as well as that business impact and overarching of what you're doing from an implementation perspective.
Great, thank you so much, Nadina. And I'll throw this one out there as well. But would one of you mind explaining the process to achieve the CTA and how it's very different from other Salesforce certifications?
Sure. I think this is probably a good one for both of us to take. Because when I got my CTA, I got mine in, I believe, 2014. I believe it was. So the process was a lot different when I took it to when Nadina took it. When I took it, you had there's a 3-step process. You had to first take a self-evaluation that you would have to pass. Then you would go through and take an exam, which I think the exam is still there today. And then you would take the board exam, which was in person, and you had to sit in front of a board of 4 CTAs and defend your position on a solution that they would give you. And I believe back then you had a little bit less time, but the solution was shorter. You had 75 minutes, I believe, to finish, to review the solution. And I think it was something like another 60 or 70 minutes to present, and then the board had another 60 or 70 minutes to grill you on it. But back when and also as part of the board, when I did it, you had to present a customer implement a customer solution that you had been a part of or you implemented yourself and defend that. But now kind of what they've done is they've taken that piece of it and rolled that into the actual scenario, so that there is no more personal customer implementation. I think what they found was maybe it wasn't, some people were struggling to have that, or maybe some people wasn't exactly theirs. And so it was better to make it more of something structured, I think, which was a better measure of the skills of the person who was in the board exam.
Yeah, that's very different from when I took it. So I passed last year, November 2022. So how it starts, you have to finish your qualifications for your domain, your application architect and your system architect. Then between that, you would do of course, there's the study and the prep. So it's not an immediate jump, but you would do your evaluation board. Once you pass that evaluation board, then you would get a date for your technical architect board. When I was doing it, it was virtual at the time. My last take was in person, so it's a 3-hour exam now for English speakers, and it's very focused on not a customer use case, but really focused on those 7 domains, going through your security, your governance, and having that I would say scenario that you've never seen before and solving it. And then once you've solved this scenario, then you have 45 minutes to present it. And then you have another 45 minutes to be grilled on this, on your overall scenario and how well you did in each section and overall.
Wow, sounds intense.
Yeah, I
Yes.
think that's one of the biggest things that was the difference when I took it. There wasn't 9 domains. There was 0 training for it available at all. So it's kind of, you had to just figure it out on your own. And now there's so many different resources. I think the 9 domains are great because it's preparing people for the CTA and helping you establish your baseline, what you need to know before to even be ready for the CTA. But then there's so many other resources now available so that you can study and you can achieve it.
Yeah, makes complete sense. And I'm trying to just get up an image, actually, if I could share my screen quickly, because just to explain what Nadina was talking about, this is obviously the pyramid to achieve technical architect. So you've got your application architect, where you need to get a variety of exams, and then your system architect on the other side as well. So it's months, if not years, of work, I think, to achieve CTA.
Yeah, I think myself, I studied 2 years myself for it. First time I didn't make it through. Second time I did. And I think that's a story for a lot of people. And this is something I've told you in the past too, I believe, Ben, is I feel that if you're, this is true for any certification. If you're just going to barely pass, did you really pass that? But I mean, I think for something CTA or any Salesforce certification, if you didn't really get an A, then you have not mastered that content. It's not about the certification, it's about the journey to get to that certification, that you are ready for that next level, that next stepping stone in career. For me, the CTA, during the studying, was really about the journey to CTA for me. I studied for an entire year and then barely failed it. I studied for another year and I thought it was easy, because it was really, I made it a lifestyle for me of getting the CTA. That was my goal, but also the knowledge. It was about the knowledge I was gaining. I think I learned probably about 20 times of what I knew from when I started the journey to when I ended the journey. And it was really an enlightening thing for me, really.
Yeah, wow. And how about you, Nadina? How long did the kind of the journey take to CTA? I think we might have.
You lose me? Am I still here? Okay.
Yes, you've come back.
Perfect. I think my internet just dropped. Yeah, I would say my journey end to end was 2 years, and the studying was the most intense part. So I did Flow Republic as part of my studying, but as well as my core group of friends from Flow Republic, we would study every day at lunchtime for an hour, and we really spent a lot of time focusing and understanding what we knew, questioning everything that we didn't know, and also just making sure that we really had that deep knowledge of the entire platform, the limits and everything. And I think I found that part of the journey the most rewarding, because at that time I thought I knew a lot about Salesforce, and I realized there's so much I did not know about Salesforce.
Yeah, great. The journey is just as important as the destination. Then, and sorry to put you on the spot again, Nadina, but Shekhar has just asked, what were the 7 or 9 domains that you have to understand?
Yeah, so it's security, it's communication, it's governance, it's solution architecture, it's data model, I feel like I'm missing one.
Identity, I think.
Yeah, identity as well. And I can't remember the other one right now.
Data integrations.
And integration, yeah.
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 Yes, great. Thank you. And thank you for the question, Shekhar. There's a few questions coming up which are quite interesting. I mean, this is kind of one here. So is the CTA just focused on Salesforce, or do you need to know knowledge about other platforms? But there was also a question further up about, is the recommendation for a solution always a Salesforce product, or could it be, something off platform as well?
That's interesting.
Yeah, I would say that really depends, right? It is a Salesforce exam. So Salesforce, I would say, is the main system when it comes to solving that solution. But there's so many other systems that you have to take into account. Your identity management system, if you're doing any off storage, if you're doing any app exchange. So there's a lot of things that you have to take into consideration. And sometimes, like when you're doing a mock scenario, it might talk about maybe that business is doing Microsoft, and you wouldn't want to necessarily always recommend a Microsoft product, but at the same time, if they already have identity with like Azure, bringing in something like Ping Identity just would not make sense. It would be challenged very deeply.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that as well. And I think that's something that people kind of get, or a misconception about the CTA, that it's just about implementing Salesforce only and on platform. It's really more about enterprise architecture, understanding the big large scale picture, everything, all the interactions, even thinking about the user experience, all the way to, I said, the core, all the other clouds, like even Marketing Cloud, the integrations, all the other systems that interact with it, as we were talking about, how the data flows, how you're authenticating, if you're using a digital experience, or are you using standard Salesforce user and password authentication, or are you using something like an Okta SSO? I think all of that's really plays plays into the solution. So you're creating a more of a holistic solution, thinking about what is that 50,000 foot view of it, and how did everything really work together. And the other thing about CTAs is people think that you need to be a developer to be a CTA, and that's not. I don't think that's true. It's more about, I think you need to understand the art of what's possible, and I think that's the key. You may not need to be a developer, but you need to understand what, if you're looking at some code, what it might be doing. You have to understand what's possible, and also when to use code, when not to use code. What's in your toolbox? So you have this giant toolbox of all these tools. You can use lots of tools. Sometimes two tools will both work, but which is the best tool for that situation? And I think that's really what it's about. And back to that question about the solution architect and the CTA, I think it's also experience. The solution architect is potentially a CTA to be, but maybe they don't understand all the tools that are available to them yet, and they haven't seen all the circumstances. They don't really consider, or haven't gotten the experience yet to consider that larger picture. And that's kind of where you make that bridge from that solution architect, or even from developer to CTA, or even admin to architect to CTA.
Yeah, makes total sense. And what would you say, for someone maybe on this call that aspires to be a CTA in the future, would you say they need to work at a particular company? I would imagine if you're working at you're an admin running a 20 user org, you're not going to get exposed to the enterprise level capabilities of Salesforce in your day job. Do you need to work at a certain company? Do you need to have another CTA working in the company to kind of mentor you? What would you advise people?
I mean, for me personally, I didn't work at a big partner while I was doing CTA. I've always worked for the customer. I like to be in-house. I would say with all the resources that are now available, there are plenty of people that you can study with and lots of groups that have been formed. And really, when you're starting the CTA journey, I think one of the biggest things is being able to reach out and figure out who else is starting that journey with you, so that you're all studying and getting some of that experience or understanding that you might not have seen in your career. So I don't think you have to work for a big partner or a big customer or anything like that. I think it's more of, you really need to be driven and understand that this is a enterprise level exam. So it's a lot of big thinking that you're going to have to do, and getting exposure to that via practicing or understanding that specific technology is key, but then also having a very vast and wide network so that you can study with other people and understand what kind of challenges they've done in their past.
Yep. And I completely agree with that as well. But I also think that, of course, working for an enterprise may get you that higher level of experience, but also another thing to consider, is it the right experience? There's so many large enterprises out there not doing it the right way, because they're large and so they're so big. There's still so many small ones that, even though they're small, that may be doing it much better. So I think it's just taking that with a grain of salt. You'll see from the large enterprise, you'll see a lot of the problems that you may encounter. You'll see the complexities. You'll see much more moving parts. But also, I think I think it's about the community and engaging with the right people that really will help you on your journey. The other thing I'm a fan of too is things like like Stephanie Herr is started Salesforce Saturdays. So that's a great place to meet people and understand what are the finding people of all different levels to kind of understand their perspectives and gain knowledge. So I think it's really about just it's like a journey for knowledge, the CTA. It's get all these different people that have worked at all these different companies. You're not going to get it all in one place. And so the more people you can interact with at all different levels, I think the better you're going to be. And that's, I think, what the CTA is really about, is in bettering yourself and helping improve how you understand and approach things on the platform.
Great, thank you very much. And this might be a perfect segue to talk about Ladies Be Architects, which is a very important organization in the Salesforce ecosystem. So who wants to kick us off and explain what Ladies Be Architects is?
I can start. So I'm a Ladies Be Architect ambassador. And when it comes to Ladies Be Architects, it's a volunteer group. It's about building confidence for women and non-binary and aspiring Salesforce architects. So We also have everyone is involved and very inclusive. So this organization was started by Gemma in 2017, Gemma Blizzard. And at the time, there weren't a lot of female CTAs. There was about, I think, 4%. And she really saw a need for having this type of community and having these types of study groups and getting people together, because at that time, there was not a lot of information or how to get into CTA in terms of understanding what you need to do versus even how to study, or even, this was before Flow Republic, before these other study groups had been formed as well.
Great, thank you. Anything to add there, Matt?
Not really. It's just more, I think for myself, I just love the mission. I've always have since Gemma started it back in 2017. I remember when she first started it, and I was just always a huge advocate for it. And I was always spreading the word, letting everyone know about it, because I think is a very important mission, and it's very helpful to people that may not even have the resources that others have to achieve those goals.
Yeah, very true. And I think we've got a link to share about a scholarship.
Yes.
How does the scholarship work?
Yes, so from the scholarship program, what we're aiming to do is really help women and non-binary individuals who meet at least 3 years of experience in a hands-on role, are currently not employed by Salesforce or a Salesforce consulting or system integrator type partner, and really help people who are aspiring to become Salesforce architects. So not necessarily just CTA, but if you're looking to further your career in terms of becoming a solution architect or an application architect or technical architect, we want to be able to help. And so sometimes having those financial barriers, it's hard to achieve those goals. And so the aim of that scholarship is to really help people in need and who might not have the financial resources to do so.
Very cool. My colleague Aoife has just shared a link to the scholarship in the comments, so feel free to apply it if it applies to you, or share it with your network as well, because it is a fantastic opportunity. Really interesting question from Leslie regarding a hot topic, Salesforce Flow. So Salesforce Flow is obviously a very, very powerful automation package, but how does a CTA work with admins to adopt best practices to avoid flow clutter?
I think that's interesting, because I know people talk a lot about flow clutter and how big those flows are. As a developer from before, I also saw a lot of developer clutter. So I would say it's more of a balance when it comes to the overall system. Some things are really great for flow, some things are really good for code. When it comes to flow and what you're building, again, it's really understanding what are you trying to solve, how you can optimize that flow. So whether you're using subflows, same as with code where you would have smaller modules and breaking it up and then calling it from a main flow, or if you're having some specific object that you're working on that already might have a Apex trigger, should you put a flow on it or not? You don't want things to run at the same time. And so you're really looking from a best practice perspective to really understand what's best for that business overall. Sometimes solo admins, they may only have flow at their disposal. They may not be able to code. And so again, really understanding where people are at, what they're trying to do with flow, and just really making sure that those flows are as optimized as possible. But as the business changes, go back and look at your flows, go back and look at your code. It's really about not a set it and forget it thing, but more of a, as you're evolving, really go and understand, does this business process still make sense for a flow or even for Apex code?
Yep, correct. And I think I'll go back to the thing of, like you were saying, that don't be focused on just one technology. It's really about that holistic picture again. Is Flow the right solution for it? Is it Apex? Is it something else? Maybe it's an external integration.
Right.
It's about looking about, and I think the best thing you can do is just learn everything about what's possible, and even more what's not possible, when you should use it, when you shouldn't use it. And I mean, the reason why a hammer exists is because you need to hit something really hard, but maybe you need to be a little bit more gentle. So that's why a mallet exists, or maybe it needs to be a screwdriver. So there's a lot of different tools in your tool belt. You need to make sure that you're using the right tool, back to that analogy. But I would say directly with Flow, things I like to do myself is I like the new, I think it's called the Flow Orchestrator or something. So you can now take that and have that a little bit better viewed and do more of a business process around the flows instead of just having a bunch of these flows together. The other thing I like to do is kind of think about flow sometimes as the driver in the business logic that helps you visualize what that business logic is. But often sometimes flow is not great when it needs to do heavy lifting. So then maybe you want to opt to Apex or something else for that. But then flow is kind of still helping you understand the bigger process. So that's kind of just generally my take on how I approach those things.
Great, thanks so much. And if you've got any more questions for our CTAs, Matt and Nadina, feel free to drop them in the comments and we'll get around to as many as we can. So another question from Shikara's came in, but a few other individuals as well. So yeah, let's say you've completed your application system application architect certifications, and now you're moving on to CTA. What would you say are some of the best resources that you can, in terms of maybe books or blogs or courses or networking groups that people could look to join to start working towards their CTA?
Well, I guess I'll start since something I just was just chatting about in the private chat. There's one group that's just a recent new nonprofit is Scale Up Architects, and that's also another one of those groups for underprivileged groups that you can go to, and it's also kind of one of those scholarship fund type things, and people give up their time, CTAs and other architects, even ex-students become new students, they become teachers to help people learn about Salesforce architecture. It's not exactly CTA, but I think it's one of those things. To that same point, there's a lot of different groups out there where you can get knowledge about in general to connect with, like I mentioned Salesforce Saturdays, you have Scale Up Architects, there's communities, even meetups. If you look online, there's so many different resources out there to connect with people. So it's really back about building that network. There's also paid solutions like what was that, Nadina, where you took your
like Flow Republic.
There's a couple. So it really depends. There's the free, there's paid. I say just build your network, and then that's probably the best answer I can give to that.
Yeah, and I would also say there's like a couple books as well. So Tamim's book, Becoming a Salesforce Certified Technical Architect, that was a really good book that I read as well. And then Matt, you took the words out of my mouth. Scale Up Arcs is really good from how you should approach architecture, and it's run by CTAs who are giving their time to help people understand each of those domains, not necessarily CTA, but more from an architectural perspective. And then there's another book. I just want to make sure I get that one as well. That was really good. Let me see. It's DJ's book, but it's a hands-on for architecture.
I'm furiously trying to get all these links for Aoife to post in the chat.
Yeah, I'm trying to do the same as well. But those two books are really good in terms of CTA studying, and there are other programs that are out there as well that are doing CTA groups. So I know there's one by, let me see.
We've also looking at that.
Mitesh has one group as well that he started for CTA training. That's really good, that I've heard good things about. Flow Republic, of course. So yeah, lots of good resources out there.
Yep. And one other thing also I would say is, remember we were talking about the CTA is not only about the technical. So in addition to just studying about the Salesforce and enterprise architecture, you should also be studying business concepts. I read a lot of business books as well, understanding negotiation, understanding presentation skills, how to get to what's the real problem. I'm a big fan of like the 5 whys. So I think in addition to your studying of looking at the architecture things, you should also start looking at some business books out there. One of my favorites called So What's Your Point? I think there's The Power of a Positive No. There's a lot of really good books out there that will help you, especially traditionally a lot of developers and technical people aren't really great on the soft skills. So that's something that you need to work really hard in sometimes, because a lot of people have told me the reason I didn't pass the CTA wasn't because I knew what I was talking about, but it was because I couldn't communicate what I knew to the judges. And I've been the judge as well, and I've seen that too, where we just couldn't understand what they were saying. We knew they knew it, but they just weren't able to present it in a way that was consumable. And I think that's a big part about being a CTA as well, is being able to interface with the business and have them understand that what you're trying to present to them, and understand the value and the reason why that they need to do what you're recommending.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that. I think so much time is spent on the technical skills. I would say storytelling is very important as well when you're doing CTA, because you can have a very technical story that is technically sound, but the story that goes with it makes no sense to your business users who you're talking to.
Exactly. And I think that you just reminded me of something, of the strategy that worked for me when I was a CTA. So I'm really big on, I like the business side of things. And so when I was going through my scenario, the first thing I would do is really understand what are all the requirements, get my requirements first, get the actors, who are the people that these are for, and start building that story. So then instead of what I see people doing is just all this list of requirements, and they say, for this, I'm going to do this, for this, I'm going to do this, for this, and then this. Instead, I read back that I understand the solution. And so I would say that, so XYZ Computing, they're looking to expand their reach into the EMEA markets, and they're selling this widget. And right now, their competition is overpowering them. So they want to be using Salesforce so they can expand the reach and connect better with their customers. And right, we have this person that's trying to do this, and this person do that. So I talk through the story, and as you're doing that, you're covering all your requirements, but also you're getting a holistic view of the scenario. So you're kind of building in everything. And then the judges are able to follow you much better because you're talking in a way that makes sense, and you're showing that you also understand the solution, rather than just picking off requirements that you saw. And then it's a lot harder to figure out and understand that you even know what the solution is.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think with, how the CTA is done now, where you have that first page that's basically about the company. I don't know if a lot of people are spending time, but I typically, when I would solve, I would read that page first to make sure I understood. And then I'd actually go and look at the governance section, because I want to understand overall, how is this scenario supposed to be governed? And I can look at that solution with that governance mindset. And that really helped me. I think a lot of people they call it like a top-down solve approach, where they'll start and they'll just go until they get to security and governance. But I would always do top, bottom, and then do the middle. So
Yeah. I think
and
oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say the book I was looking for earlier. It's called Salesforce Architect's Handbook, a comprehensive end-to-end solution guide, which is
Gotcha.
written by DJ.
I think Brad Weller's just shared that in the chat. So thank you very much,
Perfect.
Brad.
Thank you, Brad.
Great. So we've had a bunch of questions come in. So we touched on this briefly, but I think it'd be good just to come back to it. So do you need to be a developer to become a CTA? And I guess a follow-up question to that: if you're a developer, are there advantages to becoming a CTA?
I don't think you need to be a developer to become a CTA. And again, when you're thinking about a CTA, they're an enterprise architect. So it's a very high level thinking. And so what I tend to find is sometimes people get so technical that they're missing the business aspect of it. They go into a very technical solution when simple is usually best. Johan always says that, like, the simple solution is typically the right solution. And I think sometimes, yes, you definitely have to show that you know what you're doing and what you're talking about, but you don't need to be a developer. You don't need to write code. You're not writing any code on the exam. You just need to have that high level understanding of what is it that you're recommending. So if you're doing an LWC, why? Why are you doing this LWC? And then articulate that back to the judges so that they understand. Again, you're speaking to business level, C levels. They're not going to know every specifics of what is in an LWC and how you set it up. You're more talking about holistic, why you went with this approach versus something else.
Yep, exactly. I mean, CTA is about, I think the best way to say it's a program level role. So it's not typically a project level role, even though it can be. But and so back to that with the question Ben posed, I think developers, they have, of course, the advantage that they're a little bit more technical, so they probably might be better than on the technical track than the admins. But most of them, or a lot of them, are at a disadvantage because they don't understand the business side, and also they go towards more code typically than looking at that holistic solution. So they have to raise their level of thinking to a higher level so that they'll be more successful. On the same time, the admins typically have that business acumen, and they are thinking at a bigger picture of the user experience, but then they lack that technical acumen. So I think probably best thing, if you're going to study for the CTA, go meet up with someone that's the opposite of your role and help them fill those gaps. And you can help each other and partner to be able to navigate that.
Yeah, that's great.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We've got one here from Shan Mukhar, who's, maybe we can expand his question a little bit. Do you need knowledge of the entire Salesforce product suite, as far as kind of field service, lightning, high velocity sales, data cloud, how far reaching does your knowledge need to be for the CTA?
I think it needs to be pretty far in terms of you should know sales and service very well. In terms of products like Salesforce CPQ and even other clouds, you should understand how they work. You should understand that if you're going to bring in a product like Salesforce CPQ, why are you bringing in this product versus what you have at your disposal? Why couldn't this be done with like standard objects, or why are you specifically bringing in CPQ? Was it for just one requirement? You're going to get very challenged on it. So I would say the breadth of what you're needing to know is a lot, but then when it comes down to the actual solution, there's many ways to solve it, and you're trying to find the most optimal solution given the assumptions that you have made.
Yep, very, very true. I think on that same note, if the CTA focuses primarily around the core products, and of course thinking about architecture, integrations, all that, so that you don't need to be an expert on CPQ. You don't need to be an expert on Service Cloud. You do need to be an expert on Service Cloud, on Marketing Cloud, things like that. But if you bring them in, you're now opening a door. So I always tell people, don't open a door unless you are full capable of walking through. So they're not gonna ask you every single thing about CPQ, but why did you choose it? What's your pros and cons? What's the trade-off? Sometimes the judges will challenge you and say, well, okay, great, you said you want to use Salesforce CPQ. Well, what other options if you couldn't use CPQ, what else would you do? So I think those are some other things to be aware of. So if you're going to be mentioning a product, don't just mention something because you've heard of it and it's a buzzword, or you kind of know a tiny bit about it, because you're probably going to challenge them. What if one of your judges is a CPQ expert? They might dig down a little bit deeper to understand what you considered for using Salesforce CPQ versus something else, or even Marketing Cloud. What if you said, I want to use Marketing Cloud, and then they said, well, what about using Marketo instead? And so I think you need to just make sure that you understand at enough level the pros and cons versus knowing every single feature that's possible of these solutions you're recommending. One other thing, just another example really quick about that is just the walking through the door thing. A lot for data integrations, I got this all the time when I was a judge, and we would have this large data problems, and we ask them, well, what's a good way to solve if you're having slow response times in Salesforce for a list view or a report? Well, a lot of things, well, I'll just use skinny tables. It's like, great, what are skinny tables? And they knew the buzzword, but they didn't know anything about it. So they opened that door. I wouldn't have asked that question otherwise if they hadn't opened that door.
Yeah, makes total sense. Thank you very much. We've had a question here from someone who's asking if either of you have used Lucidchart, as it appears to be a new requirement. So there have been some recent changes, I think, this week to the CTA exam, which make the exam fairly different. And I think you understand about Nadina, if you wouldn't mind giving some insight into the changes.
Yes, so those changes were announced. I just want to make sure I get the dates right, October 6th. And essentially what it is now is that the boards are entirely virtual. So prior to when I was taking it, you could actually do all your diagrams on Drawn, and then you'd have to take a picture, get them uploaded into PowerPoint. Now, what I think is really great is that you have Lucid Charts and you can use the Salesforce library, which is good. When I was thinking about this, if I had to do Lucid Chart and the Salesforce library, it's probably something that I would be able to do, because at least for me, one of the hardest things about CTA, believe it or not, is making sure that, one, I took my pictures in a way that you could see the diagram properly, but also not forgetting to upload a picture. I had many a thoughts that I would forget one of my artifacts, and then that would be it, because if the judges can't see it, then how can I talk about it high level? I think now, with everything being virtual and online and everything will be there, that eliminates a lot of stress, I would say, on the candidates for trying to figure out what's the right light to get those pictures. And also, I know a lot of candidates would struggle, even like from a handwriting perspective, that their penmanship sometimes would not be the best. Now everything will be online and typed. And so with Lucid Charts, it's very new, but I think it will help a lot of candidates who had some of those initial issues. I will say, don't spend too much time trying to make this perfect diagram. Really, what you want to do is make a diagram that is legible and ensure that you can talk to this diagram and use it as an aid, just like when you have your PowerPoint. You want to put every single thing jam-packed, colorful, yes, but make sure that you're using your time wisely to talk about the actual solution and how this artifact helps.
Yep.
Great, thank you very much. There's a question from Anand here, which I don't totally understand because I haven't done the CTA, but any tips on how to balance the identification of the implicit requirements in the CTA scenario versus generating your own requirements?
Yeah, so I can start with this one as well. I think sometimes when you're reading that scenario, because of maybe like a personal experience or something that you've faced, you might see something that's not actually there. You might read a requirement and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I should use a third-party application or something like that, when really the requirement might be very simple. So what tends to happen is two things, especially like for new candidates, is they read a requirement and they don't get all the information, or there's something specific where they didn't realize this requirement is tied to an integration that they read 3 requirements up. When it comes to those types of requirements, I will say when I first started, I was very nervous that I was going to miss something, because it was I didn't read that and see integration, or I didn't read that and see that was tied to security. But the more you get on your journey and the more you're learning, you start to bring all those requirements together and look at it very holistically. And so it doesn't become a hidden requirement. It's more of, you're aware that, oh, I'm solving something that has integration, and now this specific requirement is tied to integration. So I need to make sure that when I tell my story, I'm tying these 2 requirements, even though they're spaces apart, I'm tying them together correctly.
Yep. Yeah, that complete, and that's, I think, back to that story thing of making sure that you are telling that holistic story. I think for me, the requirements are the key to the entire exam. If you don't get your requirements right, then it's very unlikely you're going to pass, because that's what you're building your solution on. So I spent a large amount of time understanding the requirements. In addition to that, to the question that was asked, I think there's also, I guess, on purpose, they leave things out in the scenario. So they want you to kind of expand on that. They want you to make assumptions sometimes. So you can make assumptions as long as you can back up the assumption. You can't just make up something wild and crazy, but you're going to say, okay, I'm going to assume that they have a point-to-point integrations already in place, and here are the ability to develop additional integrations that could integrate and connect to MuleSoft, for example. That's fair game in there. As long as you can make a valid assumption, you can. But on the flip side, the judge says, like, okay, that's great, you made that assumption. Well, what if they don't have the ability to do that? What would you do then in that case? So just be prepared if you're making assumptions that they can throw a wrench in there, and that they'll give you a different assumption that you need to act on your feet on.
Great, thank you very much. And there's one from Christopher here, who asked, how well did studying for the prerequisite certifications prepare you for the CTA?
Yeah, so for me, I think the best way to understand and to speak to that is when I studied for my prereqs, I studied to pass that multiple choice exam. But when you study for CTA, it's like a different level of studying because you're studying very holistically. And at the beginning, it feels like you're studying everything all at once and hoping that it comes together, because that's the key. You're hoping that it comes together. So I would say prereqs, once you pass them, depending on how close you pass them to getting ready to study for your CTA, I would say maybe it's like 40 to 50% of the information. But again, it's for a multiple choice exam where you have a scenario and you have the choices. Whereas with CTA, it's more of, okay, I'm studying integration, but I'm really studying integrations. Like I really want to understand why this is the best integration pattern that I can do. Should it be request reply? Should it be fire and forget? And if I go with this, what's the implication to the users? What's the impact to the business? So it's a lot deeper when it comes to studying for CTA.
Yeah, I didn't myself. I can't really answer that entirely because there were no prerequisite exams when I got my CTA, but it was still very similar. I understood all the different 9 domains, even though it didn't exist yet. So what I would do, and I would say even today, is once you've taken those prerequisite exams, then you know you have that baseline. And now you need to hyper focus on each area. Don't try to do it all at once. Say, okay, I'm going to start focusing on integration, and then you do everything you can about integration, become an expert on integration. Once you feel you've mastered integration, then move to the next one, until you feel like that you have covered everything in its entirety. The other thing I would say is once you feel like you're mastered that, or even as you're learning, find someone to present to. Do your own mini mock exams, and so that you can present to someone that says, does that make sense? And have them challenge you, someone that may know that, even better, a CTA who's already been through that. And then I think that's that check and balance to ensure that you have mastered that and you're ready to move on to the next core area to study.
Yeah, great. Makes complete sense. We've covered most of the questions. If you guys want to have a look at the questions, if you see any that we haven't answered that you want to pick out, then feel free. We do have a bit of time left. If anyone else on the call wants to submit a question, feel free. I do have a few more questions of my own, if you feel like we've answered most of them.
There's one, looks like that's from Tomas Kuros. I think it says, when you, as an architect, you're asked to provide input on implementing a new feature to an existing live project, what is the best approach to take? Should you focus on examining the feature or recommending best practices to align to it? So I think this is going to go back to the side of the business side, I would say. So for me, I'm a fan of earlier about the 5 whys. So I like to understand why are they asking that feature first off, and dig down to it, because typically most customers don't know what they're even asking for, and it's just, so don't take them at the top level. It may be a whole different reason that they're driving for that. So I would just keep digging down until I understand the true business reason why they're doing. What's the motivator for it? Or there's always something in the end. It's either they're trying to make more money, or save time. Something like that is usually where it ends up to be. And so once you figure out that base level, then you can start deciding how does that map to a Salesforce feature, thinking about time to implement, the cost to implement, urgency, all those kinds of things play into it. And also, how long is it going to stay there? Is there something you could do temporary, which is typically not a good practice, or is it something that you need to be there for the next 5 years? And so, but all of that only starts once you truly understand the underlying reason why that feature needs to exist in the first place, or maybe it doesn't need to exist. Maybe it's something that is just, they think it's a great idea, but once you talk through it, it's something that you shouldn't do at all.
I think
Yeah.
beautifully said, Matt. Nothing more to add.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Cool. So I think we can begin to wrap up, but I'd love to ask one more question just before we do. There was one actually, quite similar question that came into from Malik, who's said, do you get more opportunities in the job market as a CTO, which I feel is kind of a leading question, but I'd love to kind of understand from you both, how has becoming a CTA influenced your career? Has it opened doors for you?
Yeah, I mean, I would say for me, it's been one of those things. Once you're a CTA, you're immediately a trusted advisor, which is good and bad. Good in a sense that a lot of people are looking for you to have the answers. And it's okay to say you don't know, but you're really a role model when it comes to representing Salesforce. When I was doing my CTA journey, I actually switched jobs in between, which people typically don't do. They typically do it after. But I also, as I went through the journey, I had like so much more confidence as well, because I knew now that doesn't matter what it is that I need to learn or look at, it just takes time to do it. And with all the studying I've done for the CTA journey, it was a very big confidence boost for me in terms of where I see myself, where I see my role, and seeing myself as that trusted advisor.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to touch on, is the confidence for myself too. And when I was first getting started on the journey, I didn't know 20 times as much as I know now, and I wasn't very confident in how I recommended solutions, even how I engaged with people. When I was done, I feel very confident on being able to say that what I'm recommending is the right solution, or at least giving the right advice so people can find that right solution. I think that is truly the reason why you would want to get the CTA. To answer directly the question, I have personal experience in this. I used to work for Salesforce. I ended up leaving to start my company that I have now, or work on it. And I originally went out to find a consulting job, and I wanted to be an independent consultant, and every single person I went to, or company I went to, they said, I will hire you right now. And that was also when the CAT was still newer. So I think it was that trust that people have in you. But also at the same time, once you get hired, you need to be able to deliver. So that's, again, it's not about the credential. If you just get the credential and somehow you squeak through, there's a high standard held to being a CTA. And there's a lot of pressure in that. And that if you don't know it and you're not the best expert in the field, then of course you will not be successful. And also, with more CTAs coming in, you need to start, a lot of CTAs start specializing. Like I specialize in security, others are making their own niche. And that's another thing that you have to start doing to start differentiating yourself, because as more and more enter the market, it's just going to get harder and harder to have that, I think, immediate, hey, sure, I'm getting a job as a CTA, but what if 3 or 4 CTAs are applying for that job? How do you differentiate yourself?
Yeah. Great, thank you so much for those insights. We are literally just about to wrap up then, so I'd just like to say a big thank you to Matt and Nadina for joining us today. I understand how busy you both must be, and thank you very much for everyone for joining us today. It's been a great session, and thank you very much for all your questions. So before we sign off, any final words, Matt or Nadina, or any bits of advice for those looking to become a CTA in the future?
I would say for people who are on the journey or thinking about the journey, don't feel like you need to know everything in the beginning. Just go in with a curious mindset and know that you'll get there in your own time.
Exactly. And I'll just echo that same thing, and just live the life. Don't just act like you're always trying to go for the CTA. Just inject yourself into situations where you could learn what you're trying to learn. Get the job at the place where maybe you'll be doing that. Or try to get on projects that would help grow your skills. You don't have to just be studying all day long every day initially, and then when you're finally to that point where you feel you're ready to make that transition to truly, then you can get down and study all the time. So it's just live the life is the best thing I can say.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks for joining us, everyone. See you on the next one.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.